That's great. All right, so you know this. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to welcome our online audience real quick. But I'll tell you, the game thing is so fascinating. The game thing is so fascinating because we all grew up with so many games, and me and Celeste played the same game. I'll show you this. I played Pogs as a kid so much. Did anybody else play the Pog thing? I think we did it. How many of you? So it's just so fun. I wanted to explain it because I hadn't played it in a while, but I was like, how do you explain Pogs? And really what you did is you stacked them and then you threw crap at it. Is that really what it was? Like you had a slammer. You had a slammer, that's right. And what would happen is you would gather on the playground, you remember this, and you just get a bunch of people together, and it was like the cheapest game. And then I had this. Anybody remember this particular Pog thing? Do you remember this? Where it came with like I think I got this at KFC. I don't know, like it was like one of the toys. Yeah, that's how we roll. That's, South Carolina. Give me a biscuit, man. An Apollo 11. Anyway, so we got this. Now, something sparked for me, though. I remember when I got this particular Pog set, and I got it, and, this whole deal. By the way, I found this on eBay. This is not mine, but this is, you can buy it now for $11. Anyway, so there's this Pog set, and we got it, and what was so fascinating to me, I was really young. It was the first time that I got really interested in, like, space and space travel and all this kind of, like, I watched Star Wars as a kid. Did not interest me. Bought a Pog set, and I was like, I wonder how we did it. You know what I mean? Like something shifted in my brain. And all of a sudden, I began to think about this a lot. And specifically, what I got really fascinated with is from this really, really jankety thing, I got from this to going, I wonder how we landed on the moon. Right? Now, some of you are like, we didn't go there. That's another conversation for another time. We're not doing that today. Not doing it today. But I got so fascinated in this whole idea. And you know this too. What's so fascinating about this is when it happened, it was like the world stopped, right? Some of you remember this. Some of you remember like the world just kind of took a whole pause. I remember I was talking to my mom about this. My mom was in school. They stopped school. They put it up on the TV, and as the entire school just paused, and we just watched. Like everybody was just so fascinated by this. Now, the other part that's so interesting, and a lot of people don't talk about this, the amount of time that we like took off in flight at all and then landed on the moon was not very long. Like over the course of history, we went from like Wright brothers with a little bit of a wing thing to like now we're like, hey, we're walking on the moon. And when you think about this, it's like the most fascinating thing. And then you got like leaders that would talk about this. You've seen this before. You've seen these videos. They would cast vision about the fact that we were going to do this, right? We're going to go to the moon. And they would talk about these sort of things. And it felt like this, right? It would feel like, you go back and watch this. It felt like this giant sort of vision that could happen, but we're not really sure. And is it gonna? And there's all these missions and all these like failed missions in some ways. Even coming back, like there were all of these like things that just didn't go well. And what's so interesting, at least when I kind of grew up around this, and some of you know this too, not being alive when we did it is so fascinating about learning about it on the other side. Because this was a page in a textbook with like 3 paragraphs that I grew up with and a few pictures that didn't look this good, But looking back on it, we went from like doing this thing over here that feels small, and in some ways like we're kind of gliding intentionally, to all of a sudden going to space and landing on something and getting out and having somebody breathe in whatever this suit thing is. And all of a sudden we were walking on the moon. Now, what's interesting about this is when you think about your life in particular, you may or may not be wanting to go to the moon, even though Dude Perfect did it. I don't know if you guys saw this. They didn't go to the moon, but outer space, if you don't know Dude Perfect, if you're not 7 in the room, you don't get that joke. But there's something amazing about this where you look at it and you go, there's these big sort of grand visions that people have. There's these big moments that you have of going, we're going to go do that thing. And depending on your personality type, the way that you're wired, there's something about this that feels massive and big and great. And at the same time, it feels way, way out there. When people would cast vision about the fact that we were going to go do this, there were people that got excited about it, sure. There were people who wanted it to be done, sure. There were people who would go like, oh yeah, maybe. And then there's skepticals like, that ain't going to happen. That's not going to happen in my lifetime, all those kinds of things. But it's everything in between that becomes so fascinating for our lives. Now, we're running into a brand new year. How many of you, real quick, how many of you do like New Year's resolutions? Anybody in the room do like New Year's resolution kind of stuff or ish? There's some version of this that most people do. And then one of my favorite things to do is we'll go back and look on the last year, and me and my wife have a conversation about like, how did it go? And we'll like look at different areas of that too. There's something about coming into a new year and almost in some ways like feeling like and reestablishing hope, feeling like reestablishing vision, thinking about like what could be in a new year. You hear like new year, new you, which is always funny to me because I'm like, it's a new day, but it's not like a new life. I mean, maybe, but it's just a weird thing to think about it like you're a brand new person. But there's something about it that causes us to look into the future and think about a vision for what could be in this year. But if you're anything like me, and this is kind of my ideas on it, this is how I struggle through this. For me, I think about this a lot. A vision, right, if we're going to think about a vision for the future, a vision for what could be often misses the steps that's going to be required of me, right? Like you hear people say all the time, and I love this. You think about people who are like, this is the year that I'm going to get in shape, right? I haven't had fried food in 3 days. That's if you don't believe in God, I don't know. There is a God. I didn't eat at Wendy's yesterday. It's great. I'm having grilled chicken nuggets from Chick-fil-A. They're more expensive. I don't get it because it's less stuff on the chicken. But we'll talk about that later. If you could fix that, Truett. Anyway, so there's this thing, though. You think about it. You think about people who are trying to get healthy. This next year, and you know this. It's like, this is going to be the year I get healthy. And why is it that you get from like January 1, at least in my case, typically to January, 8. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't last very long. You can have grand visions for the future, but at the end of the day, we often don't think about the steps between now and what it's going to take to see the thing they want to do. And then if you're a person who's a follower of Jesus, or if you're a person who's spiritual at all and you pray things, there's a piece of you too that prays big prayers sometimes. Like, God, I want you to show up supernaturally and do something. God, I want you to do this sort of thing. I'm praying something big. And I think that's great. We tell you to do that all the time. And at the same time, we often also miss the fact that some of those prayers require something deeply rooted in us to take steps and specific steps towards something. So I put in my notes and said it this way, that we often celebrate like the leaps of faith a whole lot more than we celebrate the steps that we take when it comes to faith. We're really good at celebrating the giant leaps of faith that often we take. The giant leaps of faith are often the giant like overnight successes that often we celebrate, and we miss the fact that oftentimes there's so many little steps along the way. Now, here's the other part about this that you know is also true, is at the end of the day, when you think about this, it's not that you just want to take giant leaps all the time anyway. It's not that you want to bypass the process. Because at the end of the day, what we want most, what we want to move towards is some version of maturity, but you also know this, that maturity doesn't happen quickly, and maturity comes gradually, and it comes slowly over time when it comes to faith. Now, this is why we're talking about it in faith. You get this in your job. If you're leading at any sort of level at your workplace, you know this. Some of you are project managers, and you just wish your boss would get this, so you get some of that too. There's a piece of this where you know this in a lot of areas. But when it comes specifically to faith, this is something that we don't talk about a lot. Oftentimes, faith is it's either yes or no. It's either there or it's not. You're either a person of faith or you're not. You believe all the things, you don't. But most of us know that there's some sort of like spectrum and gray area and something that you're processing through. Most of us realize that along the way, it's not like this binary, I'm in or I'm out, even though it is some of that. There's a piece that's like, but I'm in, but I'm still thinking about this. Or I'm in, and I don't know what to do about this. Or I'm in, but I really don't like Christian people. There's a little bit of that. You don't have to amen, but sometimes you get that too. Like, I'm in, but I don't know what to do with this thing. I'm in, but it feels too political, and I don't know what to do about the politics of it. I'm in, but I want to love people well, and sometimes I don't feel like I can love people well and follow the Old Testament. Or I'm in, and I just don't know what to do. And there's this weird kind of in-between where it's like we trust God, but at the same time, we're also going, I don't know what to do with the gaps that exist in my faith. And so what we're going to do just for the next couple of minutes is we're going to look at one of my favorite passages, both in the New Testament and Old Testament. And it's the story of a guy that, again, if you've been around church or Christianity at all, you've heard this name. Even if you haven't, you've probably heard this name. But the guy's name is Abraham. And Abraham is so fascinating because oftentimes you hear the big stories of Abraham, and it just feels like these giant leaps of faith. In fact, when you read through the Bible a lot, what you find over and over again is if you read through it quickly without like seeing the intricacies of it, it can feel like people just take giant leaps of faith and it bypasses the steps. What's so interesting about Abraham is he does sort of these extraordinary things. God makes these gigantic promises to him and his family, but in the midst of it are like these like small steps of faith that often get missed. Now, there's a couple places where you see this. In the New Testament, there's an area of the Bible called Hebrews, and there's this section of Hebrews that is almost like, I don't know how else to say it, and it feels so cheesy, and I know that. It's like this hall of fame of faith people from the Old Testament. That's what you get. You get this list of people, and there's this phrase, it's like, by faith, they did this, and by faith, this happened. Like, it's a constant sort of thing. And I remember reading this when we were growing up in church church as a kid. We read the King James Version, so I didn't understand most of it, but I got this part of it. You know, we got these sections of it where it would come through, and it was by faith, this. And then there was the Abraham section that always fascinated me because it required so much of him that we just don't talk about. And so this is Hebrews chapter 11. Here's what it says, and it's so powerful. It says this. It says, by faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place that he would later receive as his inheritance, he obeyed and went. Now, again, this is why it's so easy to read quickly through the Bible and sort of go, okay, well, this is a great bedtime story, and that's all that there is. But you get this like by faith thing that the writer's going to keep coming back to. And faith, in the way that it's talked about in Hebrews, is really believing that God is who he said he is. He's going to do what he said he's going to do. It's people moving forward. And when you read this quickly, you go, okay, so it's like, there's almost like a carrot at the end of this for Abraham. There's inheritance to it. Of course, you're going to follow God. If you trusted God, there's an inheritance on the other side of it. I'm going to go follow whatever like the little pot of gold is at the end, right? But in the midst of this is promises that have been given to him that are powerful and don't seem to make sense at all. And so the next part, it says this. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place that he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and he went. And this is the part that's so beautiful and fascinating and weird. Even though he did not know where he was going. And this is the part when you tell your kids this before they go to bed or you're reading a Bible story, it's like, well, of course he did because he's Abraham, he's in the Bible, and that's what people in the Bible do, right? Of course, he just went and he obeyed. But what we kind of miss when we gloss over it so quickly is that he is predetermining and pre-committing to follow and obey God into something that was wildly uncertain, that didn't make sense because of his age, that didn't seem like it would come together. And he's about to leave so much of what he knows to follow God into a place. There's a big question mark in a lot of ways. Now, Hebrews is pulling from the story that's in Genesis chapter 12. And so I want to read you like the original part about this. Because in this text, there's this sort of beautiful nudging that God gives him in Genesis chapter 12. Here's what it says. Now, this is what it's referencing. It says, the Lord said to Abram, or Abraham, go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land that I will show you. And so essentially, it's like, I want you to leave everything. I want you to leave it all behind. You're going to go to a new space, a new place. You're going to do all these new things. Go, and I'm going to show you where it is. Now, this is what's just, again, funny. It's like, I'm going to show you on the way. I'm going to show you on the way to where you're going. It's not going to be this just immediate thing. I'm going to show you on the way. And then it says this, and I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. And this is all well and good unless you're a person who's past the age that people would bear children. And which is where he and his family would be. They'd get to this place where it almost seemed like God wasn't faithful to the promise because they got to a point in age where it's like, this isn't even possible. Like, this doesn't work. And God, I think you know how this works. This isn't happening. You know what I mean? You get to this space where he is going to trust God in all of these areas, both miraculously and what seemingly is these giant steps of faith. Then it goes on, it says this. It says, I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse, and all the people on the earth will be blessed through you. And so Abram went, and as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. So he gets to this point where he and his wife would be too old to have kids, but yet God's going to build this great nation from him and through him. And he gets all of these sorts of things where you're going to go and leave your thing, but you're going to go and take this giant leap of faith over here. And the part that's so fascinating, and this again, when you read it quickly, you can miss it. The part that's so fascinating isn't the fact that he took a leap of faith because he trusted God. What's so fascinating to me is that he took the first step into something. The hardest part for me isn't believing in the big or the extraordinary things all the time. It's the step towards that where there's uncertainty that often becomes very, very difficult. Now, I asked our band in production this a few minutes ago before we started the service. So this is actually probably one of the more controversial things that we'll talk about today, and I get it. How many of you, real quick, are Google Maps people, and then how many of you are Waze people? Let me ask you this real quick. So real quick, where are my Google Maps people at so that I can judge you? That's great. Google Maps. No, be proud. I mean, we all have sin in our hearts, I guess. I don't know. I'm just kidding. Google Maps. And where are the Waze people that are trying to hide from the cops? This is where you're at, right? We all know that you use Waze because it tells you where the cops are. Yeah, I totally get it. And I'm a Waze person. Let's just be honest. All right. So here's what's so funny about Waze. I love this so much. I'm terrible with directions. I'm like not like a little bit bad, but like sometimes I use directions to get from here to my house. Like that's a true story. Like I know where Chick-fil-A is, but outside of that, I don't know. And so like there's a piece of me that I'm just using directions. I'm using Waze all the time. I am like a frequent flyer of whatever they would have. And now Waze is interesting, and I love this because I don't always think about this. But I blindly trust whatever Waze tells me. Is anybody else like this? Like if it reroutes me, I'm like, sure. I just assume you know better than me. You know what I mean? Yeah, there's a lot of faith in Waze. Like there's a piece of this that Waze tells me there's a wreck. I don't check it. You know, I don't care. Yeah, sure. Let's go 45 minutes out of the way. Now my wife hates this, but there's a piece of this where I just sort of blindly trust wherever it's going to send me. The other part about this too is once I enter in where I'm going, I don't know if you've ever thought about this, I just put in where I'm going, and it's going to spit out like 20 or 30 or like especially on long trips, these long directions. Never one time have I ever questioned whether it was right. Have you ever thought about this? I'm telling a computer where I want to go, and it's telling me every turn to get there and how long it's going to take. You can be impressed with your AI chat, whatever. This is the cool stuff, right? Waze is where it's... No, I use the other thing too. Yeah, this is really cool. And I'll never forget this. I was talking to a friend about this the other day, and I thought about it. It's so fascinating. The amount of steps oftentimes it takes me to get from where I'm at to where I'm going, and the amount of trust that I have in this little phone thing that's telling me what to do, it's fascinating, it's blind trust, and it's also something I don't apply to any other area of my life. Like, if I were to call you, and you were to tell me where to go, I love you, I would not trust you. The only thing I trust is Waze. You know what I mean? That's just how this goes. I love it. You ever done this? This happens all the time. Sometimes people tell you where they live, and they're like, well, let me tell you, you need to do all these turns. I'm like, I stopped listening when you gave me the address. I don't even care anymore. Like, you know what I mean? You know, you too? Yeah, you get. I'm always like, just text me the address. And sometimes, you know this too, they'll text you the address and then continue to tell you how to get there. I'm like, I'm good. You know why? Because Steve Jobs. You know what I mean? Like, that's what it was. Like, we figured it out. So there's a piece of me that doesn't. Now, this is what's so interesting about this. The amount of steps that it takes to get where I am going might be a lot, but while I'm in the car, the only thing that I'm doing is listening to where that beautiful voice tells me where to go. Now, I love this. My father-in-law changed the voice to be like a different nationality, and he makes this joke all the time. He's like, well, now it's just like I'm following Jesus. I'm like, okay, that's not how that works. But there's this thing where I go like... You look at this, I'm like, there's all of these steps. Now, here's what's so fascinating about this. There's all of these steps from where I am to where I want to go. And I'm just going to follow the steps. And I couldn't tell you what turn 3 or 5 is. I don't know. I couldn't tell you what turn 12 is. I have no idea. Like, literally no idea. I don't know. I know where I am. I know where I want to go. And that gap in between, I'm just not even at all engaged in. Except for every other area of my life. I can get from where I am, and I can have this big sort of thing of where I want to be, and you know this. But I personally am so unbelievably engaged in every single step that it's going to take me to get from here to the next thing, to the next thing, I want a map. I want give me like the lined out specific directions of what it would look like. I made a joke about like launching a church in COVID, which is true, but we literally had a playbook, like here's what we're going to do, like here's our trigger points at this stage and all this stuff. And I laughed going, and we literally moved. Some of you know this. We moved, and the night the city shut down for some of the riots that were happening downtown. Like, do you remember this? They shut it down at 10 o'clock. I've told you this before, but I was at Raising Cane's. They closed at 10. I was like, I'm getting chicken. I'm going to do it. You know, like. And then I got to the place I was going. This is the night that we moved here. Now, but you know this too. Like, everything that we would have planned out, we literally just went, that was cute. And I was so unbelievably stressed and so unbelievably engaged in every single step to the point that says, and this is what happens to a lot of us, is at some point along the way, we had a really clear direction on where we were going. And we're pretty clear about where we are now. But we get so engaged in every step, and if you're like me, I want to like grasp at control of every one of the steps, that I'm doing this so hard to all the steps that I'm looking down here, and I very rarely sometimes look to where I'm going because I trust in me so much in these small steps along the way. Now, this sounds so cheesy, and I wish I could have figured out a better way to put it on paper, but this is what it is. For me, at least, is our response to moments without like a map or that clear list of direction. It reveals like trust in who the one like that knows the way. It reveals what I actually think about in terms of God's sort of presence in those steps along the way, right? You know this, just be honest, but like for your marriage, there are parts of your marriage that might be going really well, parts of your marriage that might not be going well at all. And there's a piece of us, you know this, that like often I'm going to grasp hold of so much control of those things. And I'm so, and this is my personality, I'm so, the last thing I do is invite God into that step. And not in some like fantasy world, like would you just fix it thing, even though I pray that, but like in this way of going, God, help me to have wisdom in this thing. Help me to know what step you want me to take here, because I'm doing this on everyone's step. Some of you have done this with your job for years. You know this. You are a great leader. You're just a great leader, and you know this. But every part of you does this to the steps between where you currently are and the vision that you have, where you should go, your company should go, your division should go, and you're doing this, and you don't ever really open your hands because you are so both confident in you and engaged in whatever that step is. And you miss the thing that Abraham had, and this is the interesting thing. You miss the thing about you, and I miss the thing about me. That goes, I'm going to follow you, and I want you to lead me, and I'm predetermining that even if I don't even know what the next 3 to 4 steps are, where you lead me, I'm going to go. I'm going to trust you. I'm going to obey. Some of you, like years ago, you know this. I think it's a God-given vision that he gave you to do something. And it feels so far out there. And you haven't taken that step, and it's not because you're not courageous enough, because you have courage. It's not because you're not a leader, because you're a leader. And it's not that you can't figure out your life enough. You can. But there's something about it that just, you don't move towards that thing out of whatever it is that causes you to go, I can't get past steps 1 through 3 to do it. And there's something about you, and this is the harder question, is will you predetermine obedience to follow wherever it is that he calls you to go? Right? The writer in Hebrews, look at this, he builds on what is said about Abram, and then he goes on and he says this. He says, by faith he made his home in this promised land. I love this. Like a stranger in a foreign country. He left the things that he knows. He goes to a place where in some ways he's an outcast, an outlier, like a stranger for a foreign country. He lived in tents, or essentially he sacrificed, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. This I will make you a great nation thing that was way out there. Give up all you know and sacrifice and come, all that's out there. He knew what it would take to leave, and he knew the sacrifices that were there, and he followed step by step by step towards what God was leading him to do. Yeah, but I came across this verse 10, and I've read this passage a lot over the years. I've read these passages a lot. But when I was reading through this this past week, and I saw this like thing nestled in this in verse 10 that is beautiful and it's powerful. And it did something, at least for me, that goes, that's not something I always trust God for. Verse 10, it says this. It says, he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. And I read this week, and I've read it a lot. And all the stuff that we talked about with Abraham are things that I focused on and spoke on before, all that. But I don't know that I've ever paused long enough for this verse to go, whatever the thing is that's way, way, way out there, I don't know that I always trust God to believe that there's a foundation that he's already built or is building ahead of me. And I certainly, I know me, I don't always trust God to go, you get to be the architect of all that. There's a lot of me, and again, maybe it's the Enneagram 8 in me, I don't know, but I'm just doing this thing a lot. How do I control it, make it? And some of you are very good at that. In fact, and this is what's hard for a lot of you, you're so good at it that everybody around you is doing this, and you're so good at reaching your potential, and you've done extraordinary things. And it's a fraction of what could happen if you actually invited God into the process and went further. The truth of the matter is that there will be a day where you reach whatever the limit is to what you can accomplish simply doing it or controlling it by yourself. And everybody around you may go, you did great, you're so great. And the other side of this, and this is what's hard, and you know this too, is that what's left on the field is the fact that you get what also God wants to partner with you and in you and through you to do. I think one of the greatest tragedies that people have isn't succeeding or not succeeding. It's being so successful at something, and at the same time, God nudging you over here to do something else, and you miss the thing that God might be nudging you to do. It might be look different. Simply because we were doing this kind of thing. And so I think my challenge, this is always fun. I could give a version of this talk in a lot of different places. And there are some places we could give this talk where there'd be like a high emphasis on like achieving, and you see this and you go and you do, and you need to do things, and you should do things. But the real truth about this, and the beauty in Abraham, especially for our context and our culture, isn't just that, because you're likely doing a lot of that. For most of us in the room, it's going, God, I want to invite you in, not just to the big picture, but to every step along the way. Right? Let me say it like this. For those of you who are dads in the room, ready? You're probably a good dad. And you know this. You know, you're a good dad. You're probably not doing things that are so devastating. You're a good dad. We're going to line up all that. You're going to be a good dad. And you might be a great dad. And everybody around you might even marvel what kind of dad you are, you know. But what kind of dad could you be if you got to whatever your limits were on it, and then you said, God, but then I want you involved in this at every step along the way? Then what happens to you at that point? What happens to your life at that point? What kind of experience do your kids get and your spouse get at that point? Again, some of you are wildly successful in so many different things. Some of you, come on, you know this. We live where we live. There's a piece of this that some of you, you've made so much. You've done so well when it comes to your resources. You know this. And everything in you does this to keep whatever it is that you've accumulated safe. This is what's always so fascinating. People talk to me about this all the time, and I always frustrate people. But it's like, people talk about tithing all the time. I always think that's so funny and fascinating, because the New Testament doesn't talk about that as much. It talks about going, no, what does it look like to be a generous human being that's posture isn't this, but it's this? If you don't give it to the church, right? If you go give somewhere, what does it look like for you to be the kind of person that makes a difference for what you've been given? Right? Some of you, that's one of your things. You're successful, but it's constantly doing this. As if it were yours anyway. Some of you do, come on, you do this in so many different areas. Some of you do this with your friendships. Some of you in the room that are single, and you know this, come on, you've tried so hard to control every part of the steps in your relationship to move forward and to find the right one or whatever it is. Some of you even worked at being the right one, like you've worked on yourself and all that, but everything about it is this. And you've never actually gone, God, I want you in every one of these steps. I want you. I want you to lead me. You know this too. And for those of you who are parents, especially like middle school, high school students, especially high school or 20-something, you know this. Some of you, your kids could date a great person and you know they're not the right person. Do you know what I'm talking about? Some of your parents did that to you, and you're like, I'm so glad I didn't end up with whoever. And there's a piece of it, and you know this, that's a gut thing. It's an intuition thing. I believe it's a Holy Spirit thing that's guiding you to move you in a place that doesn't always make sense. It doesn't always make sense at the moment, but it's predetermining trust and a movement in the direction towards God is leading you to. I'll say one more last thing, and then we'll wrap up in a second. Some of you, when it comes to your job, and you know this, you're doing well, and it's going well for the most part. And at the same time, you're extraordinarily discontent every day. And you don't know what it is. You can't put your finger on it because you're good at it. You've been good at it. You've done well. But there's this nagging voice in the back of your brain that goes, but there's something else, and you've never, ever stepped out to do what it is that you were actually called and made and built to do. And everybody around you is going, oh, so good job, you're doing it. And everybody. But in the quiet of your own mind, when you stare at yourself in the mirror, you may not be playing in the NBA. That might not be it. But there's something about you outside of those things that God is like placed in you. And you played it safe. And you played it safe because you believed that the steps that you could take were all that you could do on your own, but you never stepped out and said, God, what is it that you want to do through me? And you can run into this next year and do everything the exact same way. And at the end of it all, and you know this, be very successful and still miss what it is that God is nudging you to do. So I put in my notes, I said it this way, I said this. When it comes to our lives, it's the small steps of obedience that end up leading to like these significant lives of faith. It's not just the big leaps. Yeah, thanks, man. It's not just the big leaps. See, I grew up Pentecostal. Yeah, you could just say amen, too. That would have been great, too. Had a background in Oregon. That would have been good. Yeah. It's the small steps of obedience that lead to these like significant lives of faith. Now, here's what I mean by this, and this is where I hope that you focus this next year, is I hope you have such a beautiful and clear picture for where you're going. But I hope more than anything, even more than that picture, what I hope for you is that you say, I'm going to take this one step here, and then I'm going to invite God, I want you to do this. And you know this. A lot of you know this. And then oftentimes when you invite God into that, it's like there's a slight redirect over here, and you trust him here, and then over here. And by the time you look at your journey in life, it's not like the Waze thing at all. It's like you went all over the city, but you ended up where you needed to be. And it was exactly what God had planned for you and did extraordinary things through you with. All right, so here's what we're going to do. I think when you came in, there's like a note card on your seat. Everybody have that? Let's pull out that note card real quick. All right, I'd love for you to do that. And there should be a pen. There's either a pen in the seat in front of you, a pen underneath, that sort of thing. Now, let me say this before we walk through this. Depending on your personality type and kind of what you're like, some of you are going to love the next 3 minutes or so. Some of you are going to hate the next 3 minutes or so. But you're here, and there's enough of you where you can't escape right now. So you're in it. At least we'll just be in it together, right? There's a thing that happens a lot of times when it comes to New Year's. Some of you already do this, where a lot of people make New Year's resolutions, and there's like 20, 30, 10, 5, I don't know what it is. You make a lot of resolutions. But there's not always like an overarching direction of where you're going. And so a while ago, my wife and I started doing this. We used to have like one word, but I'm not a person who can always just do one word. So we have to look for like a one phrase. And that's just for me in our life. And we actually do this, like one phrase or one word, sort of like at different places. Like I have one of these for work. We have one of these in my head for like church where we're going. We have this for our marriage. But we're looking for like this one word or one phrase. And so the way that we've done it in the past is what we do is we take a little bit of time, I told you this, every year to reflect on this past year. And there's parts of last year for us that were great. There were parts of last year that were hard. There were parts of last year that were really difficult for us as well. And so we like process through this, like what do we want this next year to look like? And we kind of like hit a little bit of a reset button and we think about it. Now, the other part for me, and I don't know if you're wired like I am, I also am the person who wants to take 3 weeks to do this. And I'll put out 460 words, and then we're like, well, let's find the exact right one. And then I come back to wherever we would have started. I do that every time. It'd be like, well, I guess I could have just said it the way we said it the first time would have been good. Now, so if you're wired like me, a little bit of a perfectionist, I'll tell you this. We're just gonna get this down one time, and it's a note card. You can get them. They're 11 cents a piece. It'll be great. So you can get one of these or another one. You can redo it. But I want you to think through just for a second, like when you think of the direction of your life this year, like what's this one phrase or one sort of word that we're going to do? Now, before you write it down, I want to give you a couple of questions to process through before you do it. Now, you could go into a lot more depth in this, and I hope you do. But here's a couple of questions that at least help guide me over the course of the year, and that's this. What is one thing that you want God to bring, to heal, or to remove that you haven't figured out a way to do on your own, right? You just haven't figured out a way to do it. You just hadn't figured out a way to like bring something into your life that you could do on your own. There's a piece of you that hasn't been healed no matter what you've done. You just haven't figured it out yet. There hasn't been healing that's taken place. Now, what's the thing that you wish that you could remove? Honestly, like nobody wants to say this, but like there's a piece of this that sometimes this is a relationship. Sometimes this is somebody that works with you, right? We pray people out for, I totally get it. You're doing that. There's a piece of this where you go like, there's something that needs to be removed from my life, like an addiction, something that's got a hold of my life and my heart, whatever those things are. What's something that needs to be removed? The next one is this. What's one area that God is calling you to greater sacrifice? There's all like the easy, like the quick answers to this. You could talk about this with your time or your resources, those kinds of things. All of those are good, and oftentimes God is calling us to move in those. But what are like the specific areas of sacrifice that he's calling you to? Not everybody else, but to you. What does it look like for you to sacrifice in this next year, right? What is it that God might be calling you to sacrifice? And I'll just tell you this, if you don't have an initial reaction of like, oh, I don't know about that, that's not it. Those are all great. You're comfortable enough to not have a reaction to it. It's probably not it. What's the thing that would actually require something of you or from you? And then the last question is this. What do you currently lack the courage to attempt, but you would if you knew that God were with you? And this is one of those questions that like changed my life really early on. But if I were to get outside of me and my own limitations that I know that I have, if I were to get outside of the things that I know that I'm going to mess up or struggle with or really have to strive for, but if God were to get involved into something, what's the thing that if he showed up with, I'd probably just do it leaning on courage that's inspired through him and not me and my own limitations, right? What is, right? What do you currently lack the courage to attempt, but you would if you knew that God were with you? So let's go to that last slide with the note card. Can we do that one real quick? I'm going to show you what we're going to do just for the next couple minutes. We're going to invite Suzanne and Michael to come up, and we're going to do something that is going to feel a little bit odd. I don't know how to do this with like 200 of you in a room like this. I'm not sure how this all works, but we're going to do this together. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to take the note card, and here's what I want you to write. I want you to write just the first couple things that like come to your mind around those questions. Like maybe it's the remove thing. Maybe it's just something that needs to be added. Maybe it's something that you need to like process through an addiction. Maybe it's something like that. Or maybe for you, as soon as I said the courage thing, this happens all the time. Every time I talk about this, somebody's like, I know exactly what that was. As soon as you said it, I've been ignoring it. And I'm not even asking you to do anything about it yet. You just need to acknowledge what it is. What's the thing that you would do or be courageous enough to do if you knew that God were involved in it now? For some of you in the room, you'd never say it out loud. Some of you, that's staying in your marriage or getting help in your marriage. That's the thing. That's the thing for you this year. For some of you, it is the job stuff that we've talked about. For some of you, come on, I hear this one all the time. So much more than, I wish that I heard it. But like some of you, it's like repairing or reconciling a relationship with a family member or a kid who's older, whatever that is. That's the thing. You would take that step if you knew that God would be involved in the process of you moving forward. That's your thing. I want you to process that, and we're going to give you just a minute to do it. And then here's what we're going to ask you to do sort of at the end of this, all right? If you were to think about a direction over the course of this next year for your life, a word or a phrase or a thing for you, I'm going to ask you to write that down on this card as well. Now, I'm going to say one last thing, and then we'll wrap up. We'll give you space to do it. There's this thing that's called listening prayer, and it's weird, and I don't know, it's just weird to say it out loud. And there's a piece of this that's always fascinating to me. Some people talk about this in terms of meditation. We like those phrases probably better, but what listening prayer actually is, and this is odd, but it's literally like as much as you can, quieting your mind and your heart, and giving yourself a second to say, God, I want you to speak to me. And there's not going to be, I don't think, maybe it would be cool if it was for you. Like, I don't think Morgan Freeman's voice shows up and says it exactly the way, and it's not, I mean, that would, if it happens, here's my mic. That'd be great. Yeah, you should do it. But there's something about this that goes, God, what is it that you want to do? And here's what I'm going to ask you to do. It doesn't even have to be right. You can rip up this card before you leave. I hope you don't. You can do that. But I want you to write down the first one or two things that you feel like you think about when you pray that prayer. And you may go, well, what if it's just me? It might just be you. That's great. At least you processed it. It might just be. But I want you to write down, what are those one or two things that you need to put down? Like, God, what is it that you want to say to me in terms of the direction of this next year? And write it down. What are the first two words that you want to put down? First phrase that you put down. And so what we're going to do, and this is the part I don't know how to do well, Michael's going to play for us for a minute. We're going to give you about a minute, 2 minutes to think about this and to write it down on your own. So it'll be relatively quiet, except for Michael's extraordinarily guitar playing. We're going to give you a second to do that, but I'm going to ask you if you would, to be silent. I'm going to ask you to be still, unless you really, really got to go. Like, hang out here just for a second. And we're just going to take a moment, and my prayer is that this feels like a holy moment for you, as much as you can with 200 of your best friends, to write down what it is that God might be saying to you and the direction that he's calling you to go this year. So we're going to give you a couple minutes. We're going to